The February rain had finally stopped by the time we gathered at Riverside Memorial Chapel. Dad's service had been beautiful, too beautiful for the chaos that was about to unfold. I stood in the back corner of the reception hall, watching extended family and Dad's business associates navigate the buffet line with practiced funeral etiquette. My black dress was simple, from a department store. No designer label, no statement jewelry, just me, paying respects to the man who'd taught me that real wealth whispers. Maya, darling, come here. My sister Victoria's voice cut through the murmured conversations like a knife through silk. She stood at the center of the room in her Chanel suit, her husband Preston beside her in his custom Tom Ford. Even in grief, Victoria commanded attention. She always had. I made my way through the crowd, nodding politely at cousins I hadn't seen in years. "We need to discuss the estate," Victoria announced, loud enough that conversations around us began to fade. She wasn't asking for a private moment. She was holding court, specifically the Malibu property. My brother Derek appeared at her elbow, phone already in hand. "I've been researching contractors. The place needs serious work. Probably $2 million minimum to bring it up to current standards." 2.5, Preston corrected, scrolling through his own phone. "I had my architect take a look last month. The deck alone needs a complete rebuild. 800,000, easily." I said nothing, just held my coffee cup and listened. "Maya, sweetie, we know this is difficult," Victoria continued, her tone dripping with the condescension she'd perfected over our 34 years as sisters. "But we need to be practical. The Malibu house is the crown jewel of Dad's estate. Derek and I have already discussed this extensively. We'll handle everything, the renovations, the staging, the sale. You won't need to worry about any of it." "That's generous of you," I said quietly. "Well, you've always been more modest in your ambitions." Victoria smiled, the kind of smile that managed to be both pitying and dismissive. "We just want to make sure Dad's legacy is handled properly, by people who understand real estate at this level." Around us I could feel the attention of every person in the room. Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, had stopped mid-conversation. Dad's former business partner Robert Chen was watching with undisguised interest. Even the catering staff had slowed their movements. "The house is worth at least $12 million in current market conditions," Derek said, pulling up a real estate website. "Once we put the 2.5 into renovations, we're looking at 15, maybe 16 million. Split 3 ways after expenses, that's about 4.5 million each." "Actually," Victoria interjected, "Maya, we were thinking, and please don't take this the wrong way, but given your financial situation, wouldn't you prefer we just buy out your share now? Save you the hassle of dealing with contractors and real estate agents. We could offer you, say, 3 million, cash. Immediate." The insult was wrapped in so much false concern it almost sounded like kindness. "Almost. 3 million for a 4.5 million share?" I asked. "Well, there's risk involved," Preston explained in his management consultant voice. "Renovation overruns, market fluctuations, carrying costs. We'd be assuming all of that. Really, we're doing you a favor." Victoria placed her hand on my arm, the gesture almost maternal. "Sweetie, let's be honest. When was the last time you even visited the Malibu house? You've always been more comfortable with simpler things. Remember that apartment you rented in Studio City? You were so proud of it." She laughed, musical and cruel. "We just think the money would serve you better than property you'd never use." "The Malibu house is mine," Victoria announced, turning to address the room at large. "We all know Dad wanted me to have it. He told me so many times over the years. Victoria, you understand beauty. You understand quality. You'll know what to do with the beach house." Those were his exact words. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding, some uncomfortable. Derek pulled out his tablet, already showing architectural renderings. "Look at this. I had Martina's design group mock up some concepts. Glass walls here, infinity pool extending toward the ocean, full smart home integration. This is going to be a showpiece." "Martina's design group," Robert Chen spoke up from across the room. "Derek, they're booked 2 years out. How did you? I called them 3 weeks ago." Derek said casually. "When Dad went into hospice, just being prepared." The room went very quiet. Victoria recovered quickly. "We're planners. That's why Dad trusted us with the important decisions." "Maya, honey, why don't you think about our offer? 3 million is a lot of money for someone in your position." "My position," I repeated softly. "You know what I mean." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "You work in, what is it again? Something with computers? One of those tech startup things that never quite took off." She turned to Aunt Linda. Maya's been trying to make it in business for years. It's sweet, really, very determined. But at some point you have to acknowledge your limitations. Preston nodded sagely. The business world isn't for everyone. No shame in that. The Malibu house will be perfect for our family. Victoria continued. Preston's firm is expanding their West Coast presence. We're going to need a proper residence out there. The children will love spending summers on the beach. It's what Dad would have wanted. The house staying in the family. Being used. Being loved. You weren't there, I said quietly. What? In 2019. When Dad was facing foreclosure. When the medical bills from Mom's cancer had drained everything. When the business investments went bad. And the creditors were circling. You weren't there. Victoria's expression hardened. That's not fair. You told him it was a bad investment. That throwing good money after bad was foolish. That he should just declare bankruptcy and start over. I gave him sound financial advice. Victoria snapped. Which clearly he should have taken. He called you first. I continued. My voice still quiet but carrying through the silent room. When the bank sent the foreclosure notice on the Malibu house, he called you before he called Derek. Before he called me. Derek shifted uncomfortably. We were going through our own financial situation. Your hedge fund lost money that quarter, I said. You told Dad you couldn't help. Victoria, you just bought your brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. You told him real estate wasn't liquid. This is inappropriate, Victoria hissed. At Dad's funeral. You're the one who brought up the Malibu house, I pointed out, in front of 100 people. At Dad's funeral. The attorney Martin Breslow had been standing near the back wall. He cleared his throat now, stepping forward with his briefcase. Perhaps this conversation should happen in a more private setting. No, Victoria said sharply. This is family business. These are Dad's friends, his associates. They deserve to know how his legacy will be handled. By responsible parties who understand the weight of what he built. Martin's jaw tightened. He'd known my father for 30 years. Mrs. Ashford, I really think the house is worth $12 million minimum. Victoria continued, pulling out her phone. I have comps from 3 different realtors. There's a property 2 houses down that sold for 13.2 last year, and it didn't even have direct beach access. Dad's house has 200 feet of private beach, 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, 8,000 square feet. This isn't some teardown in the valley. This is Malibu. This is serious real estate. I've already reached out to Sotheby's, Preston added, their luxury division. They're very interested in the listing. We're thinking we could have it on the market by April. Maximize the summer buying season. You reached out to Sotheby's. Martin repeated slowly. When exactly? Preston checked his watch. About 2 weeks ago. Market timing is crucial with properties at this level. Dad died 4 days ago, Aunt Linda said, her voice sharp with disapproval. We're being practical, Victoria insisted. Someone has to be the adult in the room. Dad would have appreciated our forward thinking. I watched my sister, this woman I'd grown up with, who'd taught me how to braid my hair, and helped me pick out my prom dress, who'd gradually transformed into someone I barely recognized. Success had changed her, or maybe it had just revealed who she'd always been. Maya, Derek said, adopting a gentler tone, we're not trying to cut you out, we're trying to include you. But be realistic. You drive a Honda, you live in a rental apartment. You've never shown any interest in maintaining property at this level. The property taxes alone on the Malibu house are $90,000 a year. The insurance is another $60,000. When's the last time you had $90,000 in liquid assets? The room was watching me now, waiting for my response. Some faces showed pity, some showed curiosity, a few showed something else. People who'd known my father well, who were starting to sense something wasn't quite right with this whole performance. The $3 million offer stands, Victoria said, but only for the next 72 hours. After that, Derek and I will pursue other options. We're prepared to buy you out at fair market value for your share, minus legal fees and administrative costs. That would be approximately $2.7 million. Take it or leave it. Take it, Preston advised. Honestly, Maya, it's more money than you'd probably see in your lifetime otherwise. Martin Breslow had been gripping his briefcase tighter and tighter. Now he set it down on a nearby table with a decisive thump. Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Morgan, I need to stop this conversation right now. Martin, we're in the middle of discussing the disposition of property you don't own. Martin said flatly, haven't owned, and never will own. Derek frowned. What are you talking about? Of course it's part of Dad's estate. It's the primary asset. The Malibu property is not part of David Morgan's estate, Martin said, louder now. It hasn't been since October 15, 2019, nearly 6 years ago. Victoria laughed, but it sounded forced. That's impossible. Dad lived there. We visited him there. I was there for Christmas last year. Your father lived there as a resident, not as an owner, Martin continued. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal folder. On October 15, 2019, David Morgan sold the property at 42750 Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu, California, to Morgan Coastal Properties, LLC for the sum of $6.8 million. The sale was recorded with the Los Angeles County Registrar Recorder. The deed is a matter of public record. The room had gone absolutely silent. Morgan Coastal Properties, Derek said slowly. That's Dad's company. Morgan Coastal Properties is wholly owned by Maya Elizabeth Morgan, Martin said. He pulled out a document and set it on the table. She purchased the property from your father when he faced foreclosure. She allowed him to continue living there, rent-free, for the remainder of his life, per the agreement they made privately. I watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a desperate calculation. That's not possible, she whispered. Maya doesn't have that kind of money. She couldn't have. The property was purchased for cash, Martin continued. $6.8 million. The transaction was handled through my office. David was very specific that the arrangement remain private. He didn't want his children. Martin paused, choosing his words carefully, to feel uncomfortable about the situation. This is fraud, Victoria said suddenly, her voice rising. Dad wasn't in his right mind. In 2019, he was grieving Mom. He was vulnerable. Your father was examined by 2 independent physicians before the sale, Martin interrupted. Both certified his mental competence. Additionally, the sale was reviewed by 3 separate attorneys, none of whom were me. David wanted to ensure there could be no questions about the legitimacy of the transaction. Preston had pulled out his phone, already typing. I'm looking up this Morgan Coastal Properties. If this is some kind of shell company scheme. It's registered in California, Martin said. Single member LLC. Filed in 2019. All appropriate taxes paid. All filings up to date. Would you like the registration number? Maya couldn't afford that, Derek insisted. She was working at some startup. I was running a startup, I corrected softly. DataStream Analytics. We developed predictive algorithms for supply chain optimization. I founded it in 2015. We were acquired by Amazon in 2018 for $420 million. My share, after investors and employee stock options, was $93 million. The room erupted, not with noise, but with a collective sharp intake of breath, like all the oxygen had suddenly been sucked away. Victoria was staring at me. You're lying. The acquisition was public record, Martin said. It was reported in TechCrunch, The Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. Maya maintained a low profile and retained her privacy, but the sale was entirely legitimate and documented. 93 million, Derek repeated, as if the words didn't make sense in that order. After taxes, approximately 54 million, I said, which I invested conservatively. The Malibu house was 6.8 million. I've also maintained the property over the past 6 years. Renovation of the master bathroom, new roof, updated electrical system, refinished hardwood floors, new HVAC, total investment, including the purchase price and improvements, approximately 8.2 million. Preston was scrolling frantically through his phone. Here, DataStream Analytics, acquired by Amazon Web Services in March 28. Purchase price, $420 million. He looked up at me, his face pale. The founder was listed as M. Morgan. I thought that was a man. Most people did, I said. I preferred it that way. Fewer distractions. Victoria's hands were shaking. Dad never said anything. He never told us you had that kind of money. He lived in that house like it was his, because I wanted him to, I said simply. He was humiliated by the foreclosure, devastated. He'd built a successful career, provided for his family, and then one cascade of bad luck and bad timing nearly took everything. When I offered to buy the house, he refused. Multiple times. He said he wouldn't take charity from his daughter. So you structured it as a sale, Martin added, with the agreement that David could live there as long as he wished. He insisted on that arrangement. His dignity was very important to him. I didn't know he was telling people he still owned it, I continued. I assumed he'd eventually mention the arrangement to you both. But after a few years, when he never did, I understood. He needed to feel like he'd held on to something. Like the cancer and the medical bills, and the business losses hadn't taken everything. Aunt Linda was crying quietly. Robert Chen nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. Why didn't you tell us? Derek asked, and for the first time, his voice wasn't calculating or dismissive. It was genuinely confused. Would you have treated me the same if you'd known? I asked. Victoria, you've spent the last 10 years explaining to me how business works, how real estate works, how money works. Would you have done that if you'd known I had more business experience and more assets than you? Victoria said nothing. Her face had gone from pale to red. You called me honey, I continued quietly. Sweetie, you offered me $3 million for what you calculated was a 4.5 million share. You were trying to cheat me out of $1.5 million. At our father's funeral, what would you have done if you'd known the truth from the beginning? I would have. Victoria started, then stopped, because we both knew what she would have done. She would have asked for money, for loans that became gifts, for investments in Preston's ventures, for the family share of something she thought should be hers. The property is currently valued at approximately $11.8 million. Martin continued, because someone had to keep this procedural. Maya has invested $8.2 million. The property generates no income. She allowed David to live there free of charge. She's paid all taxes, insurance and maintenance from her personal funds. The arrangement was extraordinarily generous. I had contractors look at the house last month, Derek said, almost to himself. They gave me estimates. They thought I was the owner. I told them. He stopped, realizing what he'd done. You told them you were planning renovations, I finished. Which is why Martina's design group sent me a very confused email last week, asking if I'd authorized you to solicit designs for my property. I told them no. I told them to send you their standard cease and desist. Derek's face was now matching Victoria's in color. The Sotheby's inquiry, Preston said slowly. They must have contacted you too. They did, I confirmed. I informed them the property is not for sale, and that you had no authority to represent me or my assets. They were very apologetic. Victoria finally found her voice. You let us stand here. You let us make plans. You let us discuss selling your house, spending your money, and you just stood there listening. You didn't ask, I said simply. You announced. You assumed. You decided. You offered to buy me out at below market value. You called me sweetie and honey, and told me I didn't understand real estate at this level. I was curious how far you'd go. This is cruel, Victoria said, and there were actual tears now. Dad just died, and you're playing games. I'm not playing anything, I said. And for the first time, I let some steel into my voice. You're the ones who decided to announce property plans at a funeral. You're the ones who tried to pressure me into a deal before I'd had time to grieve. You're the ones who spent the last decade treating me like I was too stupid to understand my own life. Around the room, people were whispering now. Phones were coming out. This would be all over our father's social circle by tonight. What happens now? Derek asked quietly. Now. I set down my coffee cup. Now we honor Dad's life and legacy. We remember him as he was brilliant and kind, and sometimes too proud for his own good. We acknowledge that he went through an incredibly difficult time and came out the other side, with his dignity intact, even if he had to accept help from his daughter to do it. And the house? Victoria's voice was small now. Is mine, I said, as it has been for 6 years. I haven't decided what I'll do with it. Maybe I'll keep it. Maybe I'll sell it. Maybe I'll turn it into a foundation in Mom and Dad's names. But that decision is mine to make, in my own time, without pressure or interference from anyone. Martin closed his briefcase with a decisive click. If there are no further questions about the estate, and I mean legitimate questions about assets actually contained within the estate, I suggest we return our attention to honoring David's memory. Victoria and Derek stood frozen. Preston had put his phone away. The room was still quiet, but the quality of the silence had changed. People weren't waiting for the next development anymore. They were processing what they'd just witnessed. Aunt Linda came over and hugged me, hard. Your father was so proud of you, she whispered. He told me everything. About the company, about the house, about your generosity. He made me promise not to tell anyone. He said you valued your privacy. I did, I said. I do. He also said you were 10 times the business person your siblings would ever be, she continued. He said you understood what mattered, not the appearance of wealth, but the reality of it. Robert Chen approached next. Maya, I wanted to say, your father spoke about DataStream at length. He was fascinated by your algorithms. He said you'd found a way to predict supply chain disruptions 6 months out with 92% accuracy. Is that true? 94% in the final model, I said. We incorporated weather pattern analysis and geopolitical risk assessment in the last iteration before the acquisition. Remarkable. Robert shook his head. Your father said you could have been a billionaire if you'd held out for a better offer. Amazon's offer was fair, I said, and I wanted to pursue other interests. The company was taking all my time. I'd missed the last 2 years of Mom's life because I was building something. I didn't want to miss Dad's final years the same way. Robert nodded slowly. He said that too, that you chose people over profit. He said that made you smarter than anyone else in the family. Victoria was still standing in the center of the room, looking lost. Derek had moved to the windows, staring out at the rain that had started again. Preston was making quiet phone calls, probably to his office, probably explaining that certain representations he might have made about Malibu property access were no longer operative. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Martin touched my elbow gently. There are a few more estate items we should discuss. Nothing major, your father's personal effects, some smaller financial accounts. Can you come by my office next week? Of course. And Maya, he lowered his voice. Your father's instructions were very clear. He wanted the truth about the Malibu house to come out after his death. He said he'd lived with the fiction long enough, and that you'd borne the burden of the secret with grace. He wanted your siblings to know what you'd done. He felt they needed to understand. Understand? What? That wealth isn't about what you display, Martin said. It's about what you do, how you use it, who you help with it. He said you'd learned that lesson naturally, but that Victoria and Derek needed it taught to them. He thought this might be the teaching moment they needed. I looked across the room at my sister and brother. Victoria had composed herself now, her mask sliding back into place. Derek was talking to Preston in low, urgent tones. They were already strategizing, already figuring out how to spin this, how to recover from the public humiliation. Maybe they'd learned the lesson Dad wanted them to learn. Maybe they wouldn't, but that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'm going to head out, I told Martin. It's been a long day. Of course. He handed me a business card, my direct line. Call anytime. I made my way toward the exit, nodding to a few of Dad's friends who offered condolences and knowing looks. As I reached the door, I heard Victoria's voice, sharp and carrying. This doesn't change anything about who we are as a family. I paused but didn't turn around. We're still successful. We're still respected. Maya got lucky with some tech company, but that doesn't make her better than us. It doesn't mean she understands how the real world works. I could have turned around, could have mentioned the other properties Morgan Coastal Properties owned. The 12-unit apartment building in Santa Monica, the commercial space in downtown LA, the venture capital fund I'd started with $15 million in seed money, now worth over $40 million. The charitable foundation in Mom's name that had donated $3 million to cancer research over the past 5 years. But I didn't, because Dad had been right about one thing. Real wealth whispers. I pushed through the door and stepped out into the February rain, breathing in the clean cold air. My Honda was parked at the far end of the lot, next to Victoria's Mercedes and Derek's Tesla. As I walked toward it, I pulled out my phone and texted my property manager. David Morgan has passed. The Malibu house is going to need a full assessment. Also, I'm thinking about opening it up as a writer's retreat. Small groups, fully funded residencies. Can you research the logistics? The response came back immediately. On it. Sorry for your loss. David was a good man. He was. He really was. And he'd taught me, in the end, the most important lesson. That the best revenge isn't confrontation or exposure. It's living well, quietly, on your own terms. It's knowing the truth about who you are, and not needing anyone else's validation. I unlocked my Honda, slid into the driver's seat, and headed home through the rain. Behind me, in that reception hall, Victoria was probably still holding court. Derek was probably still strategizing. Preston was probably still making calls. And none of it mattered, because I had learned what they never would. That success isn't about what other people see. It's about what you do when nobody's watching. It's about the quiet generosity that expects nothing in return. It's about letting your father keep his dignity, even when you're the one paying for it. The Malibu house would become a writer's retreat. Artists and authors from across the country would apply for residencies. They'd spend their days in the house my mother loved, looking out at the ocean my father walked beside every morning, creating beautiful things in a space that had been saved not by pride, but by love. And Victoria and Derek would never understand that all of this was exactly what Dad had wanted. Not a showpiece, not an asset, not a line item on an inheritance spreadsheet, but a legacy. The kind that matters, the kind that lasts.